Most people don't struggle in Phoenix because they chose the wrong house. They struggle because no one explained how Phoenix actually works. And by the time they figured it out, they're already locked in. This video is about the part that usually gets skipped. If you've been researching Phoenix online, you've probably seen dozens of lists claiming to show you the best suburbs. Best for families, best for professionals, best for lifestyle, best places to live, and best places to move. And at first glance, those lists look super helpful. They're clean, they're organized, and they make a huge decision feel super manageable. But here's the controversial truth. Most of these lists do more harm than good. Not because they're lying, and it's not because they're intentionally misleading, but because they oversimplify something that should never have been simplified. Today, I want to explain why those best Phoenix suburb lists are misleading, why buyers rely on them anyway, and how to make better decisions than the internet does for you. Because if you're relocating to the Phoenix area, trusting those lists too much can actually quietly set you up for frustration later on. Lists feel super helpful because they reduce the complexity overall. They take something that's very overwhelming and they turn it into something manageable. They give you a sense of control. Instead of learning an entire metro area, you get a nicely ranked list. And psychologically, that feels so much safer. But Phoenix doesn't work well in a list form because Phoenix is not one single experience. It's a massive, spread out metropolitan area where daily life changes dramatically depending on where you land. What's best in Phoenix depends entirely on how you live, not how a suburb scores on a list. And most lists ignore that just completely. Most best suburb lists are built around just surface level data. They look at price, they look at crime stats, school ratings, amenities, and the nice newness. These things look objective and they feel measurable, but they don't tell you how a place actually feels once you get to live there. A suburb can look incredible on a list and still feel wrong in real life. That's where buyers get completely caught off guard. One of the biggest problems with these lists is that they treat Phoenix like one single experience. They assume that all commutes are similar. They assume that all the heat is experienced in the exact same way. And they assume convenience is evenly distributed no matter where you end up. It's not. Phoenix magnifies its differences. A 10-minute difference on a map can completely change how your day feels. A slightly different location can alter how often you leave the house, how much you plan, and how flexible your life feels. Lists just flatten those real life experiences. They smooth out the edges, and that creates a false confidence. Buyers read a list and think, if they're in one of the best areas, it must work for us. What best is according to who? And best for what kind of life? What kind of lifestyle? Another major issue with lists is that they ignore the daily logistics. They don't account for how often you have to get in the car and drive. They don't account for when you have to drive. That makes a huge difference in your commute. They don't account for how heat, traffic, and distance interact. They don't ask you, how many times a day do you leave to go pick up the kids? They don't ask how spontaneous your life is. They don't ask how much effort you're willing to tolerate. Instead, they assume that everyone lives the exact same way in every location. And that assumption breaks down quickly here in Phoenix. Another problem is timing. Lists freeze a moment in time and present it as a long-term answer. They don't account for growing cities and construction cycles. They don't account for traffic changes. They don't account for how neighborhoods evolve after they fill in. What works well today may feel completely different just a year from now. A suburb that feels quiet now may feel super congested later on. An area that feels convenient now may feel stretched as that growth continues. These lists don't adapt with that. They don't explain these trade-offs and they don't show you what could change. They just rank. And ranking creates the illusion of what certainty is. Buyers who rely heavily on these lists often feel very confident with their decision. They think they've done all their research. They think they've chosen wisely. And then real life starts and the confusion starts to set in. They say things to us like, this is supposed to be one of the best areas. They would say, we thought this would feel easier. They say, we didn't expect things to be so spread out. The problem isn't that the list was wrong. The problem is that the list never asks the right questions like we do as realtors. Another uncomfortable truth is that many of these lists are built to perform well online, not to actually help buyers live and decide well. They're designed just to rank in those search results. They're designed for you to click share on your social media. They're designed to appeal to the broadest possible audience. And that means they avoid all the little nuances. They avoid the friction. And they avoid this works for some people and may not work for others. Instead, they just label. The labeling feels authoritative, but authority without context is dangerous in a city like here in Phoenix. Another issue with best suburb lists is they reward appearances. They favor those newer areas. They favor those polished entrances. And they favor places that photograph well. And what looks good online doesn't sometimes actually live well. Wide streets look great in photos, but wide streets often mean longer internal drives to your house. New neighborhoods look super clean and very organized, but new neighborhoods often lack convenience. And lists don't penalize the distance. They don't penalize effort, and they don't penalize friction. They reward that surface level appeal. And buyers who follow these rankings often discover the trade-offs later on. Another reason these lists are misleading is that they treat all buyers as if they want the same exact thing. They assume everyone values the exact same features. They assume everybody's tolerance for driving is exactly the same. They assume everybody runs errands the exact same way. They assume everyone experiences time and their schedule the same way. They assume everyone just adapts easily, but that's not reality. Some people thrive in spread out environments. Others feel just drained by them. And some people love planning and structure, while other people value that spontaneity. Some people don't mind those longer drives, and others feel super boxed in by them. Lists just don't differentiate. They just average. And that average rarely describes real people with real experiences. Another controversial truth is that many buyers use these lists to avoid that deeper thinking. The list just feels like a shortcut. They allow buyers to say, we chose one of the best areas. And that feels reassuring. It feels defensible. It feels safe. But it doesn't guarantee it's going to be the right fit. And that fit matters more than that ranking. Another thing, these lists ignore how Phoenix heat interacts with the location. Heat isn't experienced equally everywhere. Some areas buffer it much better and other areas just amplify it. Some locations allow you to move quickly between destinations and others require long stretches of exposure. And these lists don't factor any of that in. They treat heat as a background condition. The heat shapes behavior and frustration, let me tell you. It influences when you leave the house. It influences how often you go out in the summer. And it influences how much effort just daily life requires. Buyers who rely on these lists don't realize this until they're living in it. Another overlooked factor is how lists treat convenience as just binary. They assume amenities equal convenience. But convenience isn't about having amenities somewhere nearby. It's about how easily you can access what you actually are going to use. A list may say an area has great amenities, but if these amenities require driving across multiple major roads, that doesn't feel convenient. It feels like another task. Lists don't measure this friction. They don't measure effort, and they don't measure how life actually flows. They measure features, and features don't guarantee ease. Another problem is that these lists don't account for how routines just change over time. What works for a buyer at the moment they move may not work later on, maybe when the kids are older. Work schedules change, families' needs change, energy levels change. Tolerance for these inconveniences just change. The lists don't adapt. They don't warn you that a place that feels fine may feel limiting later. They present discussion as a statistic, but life isn't a statistic, and Phoenix amplifies those shifts. The buyer who struggles the most are often the ones who have trust these lists the most. They assume that if an area was ranked high, it would work for them, and they don't realize that this list was answering a different question. It wasn't asking, will this support your daily life? It was asking, will this appeal to the most people online? They're not the same thing. The buyers who are the happiest in Phoenix don't start with lists. They start with questions. They ask what a normal weekday actually looks like. They ask, how often do you actually leave the house? Or do you work from home? They ask how much driving feels reasonable to you. They ask how much planning they're willing to tolerate. They ask how important is flexibility to you. They ask how they want life to feel, not how they want life to look. These answers matter more than rankings. Another controversial truth is that the list creates false confidence. They make buyers feel like they've eliminated all of that risk. But in reality, they're just delaying the understanding. The understanding comes later, after the move. And that's when that frustration really sets in. Phoenix is a city where small misalignments add up, and lists are very good at hiding those small misalignments. They smooth over those nuances. They flatten differences, and they reward the simplicity. But Phoenix demands specificity. It rewards intentional decisions, and it punishes assumptions. The buyer who thrives here didn't choose the best suburb. They chose the right one for their life. They didn't chase the rankings, they chased alignment. They didn't ask what was popular. They asked what would actually work. If you're relocating to the Phoenix area and feel super overwhelmed by the conflicting advice online, feel free to reach out. Cutting through that noise and helping buyers understand how the Phoenix area actually functions is what we do. And that clarity can save you from choosing the place that looks perfect on a list or online, but feels wrong once you start living here. If you're still in the planning phase of your move, that's the best time to have this conversation with us. Reach out before you choose a location, not after. It can change your entire experience living here.